Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have.
What we're looking at here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the tree of life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side.
Holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says, it's an amazing feeling.
What if the world's first civilization didn't just invent writing, but used it to shape reality itself? Before he died, Sumerian expert Samuel Noah Kramer uncovered repeating phrases across myths, tax records, and temple logs, and what he found shook him. These weren't just words. They were code. A hidden system linking gods, rulers, and scribes into something far more powerful. His final warning? We've misunderstood it all. And once you see what the ziggurats reveal next, you won't unsee it. Sentences that wouldn't let go. Samuel Noah Kramer had read thousands of Sumerian tablets, everything from lists of grain deliveries and royal decrees to temple hymns and creation myths. Most of it made sense, each line neatly fitting into its category. But then something started to bother him. He began to notice certain phrases popping up where they didn't belong. A line meant for a temple ritual would suddenly appear in a warehouse record. A hymn to a god would resurface in a worker's ration list. These were fragments that refused to stay in their lanes, echoes that followed him from one translation to another. At first, Kramer brushed them off as coincidences or lazy habits of scribes. But as he went deeper, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The same words, numbers, and sentences were appearing across completely different kinds of texts. He began calling them the sentences that wouldn't let go. These lines seemed to cross every boundary between sacred and practical, myth and math, prayer and paperwork. To most scholars, this overlap was meaningless, just a shared vocabulary of an ancient culture. But to Kramer, it hinted at something far greater, a hidden design buried in the world's first writing system. He started tracing these repeating phrases through archives from cities like Ur, Uruk, and Nippur. And there they were again, the same sacred echoes buried in the most ordinary records. One pattern especially caught his attention. Words like raising and purifying appeared in both temple hymns dedicated to Enlil and in administrative texts from the time of King Ur-Nammu, around 2100 years before the Common Era. The same language used in prayers to the gods was also found in records describing the building of the great ziggurat at Ur. It was as if worship and construction shared a single purpose, blending the spiritual and the physical into one grand design. Why would a builder's log use the same words as a sacred chant? Why would the act of laying bricks be described as binding heaven and earth? The deeper Kramer looked, the more he found. Lines that opened prayers also appeared on accounting tablets. Blessing formulas matched the phrases used to seal trade deals. Even numbers believed to be divine, 3, 7, 60, showed up in both myths and ration schedules. It became clear. The Sumerians weren't just recording their world with writing. They were aligning it. For them, writing wasn't neutral. It wasn't just a memory tool. It was a blueprint for thought itself. By weaving sacred language into everyday records, they erased the line between religion and administration. Every tablet, whether it listed sacrifices or taxes, quietly reinforced one truth. Divine order and human order were one and the same. By the time Kramer published his later works, he realized those sentences that wouldn't let go were part of something much larger, a civilization teaching itself how to think through repetition and design. But soon his attention shifted from words to something even grander, a message not written on clay tablets but carved into stone itself. The ziggurat. And that's where the next discovery begins, when the ziggurat reveals itself as more than a monument. The three-dimensional text. When Samuel Noah Kramer turned his attention from clay tablets to the ruins of the great ziggurat of Ur, he began to see something remarkable. The Sumerians hadn't just written their beliefs, they had built them. Rising from the flatlands of Mesopotamia like a mountain made by human hands, the ziggurat served as both a temple and a symbol. Its layered terraces reached toward the sky, ending in a shrine dedicated to the moon god Nana. To Kramer, every brick and every alignment with the stars carried the same message he had found hidden in the tablets: the unity of heaven, earth, and divine power. As he looked closer, he noticed that the words on the tablets and the structure itself seemed to reflect each other. Inside the temple archives, he found records listing bricks, materials, and offerings. Simple administrative notes at first glance, but the language in those records stood out. Lines from sacred hymns appeared in construction logs, and verbs like to purify, to ascend, and to bind heaven were used to describe basic building work. One detail made this connection clear. Foundation cylinders buried at the corners of the ziggurat mixed the practical with the spiritual. They combined the builder's measurements with hymnic phrases, even using a single Sumerian word, kugsig, to mean both to build and to make sacred. It showed that for the Sumerians, construction wasn't just labor. It was devotion in motion. That's when Kramer began calling the ziggurat a three-dimensional text, something that could be read, understood, and climbed. Each level represented a different part of the cosmos. The base stood for the earthly world, the middle levels for the sky and stars, and the top for the divine realm. Climbing it was like walking through a story of creation and faith. The deeper Kramer looked, the clearer the pattern became. Offerings to the moon god were written in rhythmic lines that mirrored the ziggurat's stepped shape. In royal inscriptions, kings were described as the stair between gods and men, turning rulers into living versions of the ziggurat itself. Every number, word, and symbol seemed to echo the same idea that power, faith, and order were all part of one sacred design. But this architectural theology didn't appear by accident. Behind every inscribed brick and every sacred alignment stood the scribes, the true architects of this system. Scribes who ruled like gods. When Samuel Noah Kramer traced the same phrases from temple hymns to the ziggurat terraces, one truth became clear. Behind every sacred verse, royal command, and construction record stood the scribes. They were the quiet architects of Sumerian civilization, the ones who turned thought into record and record into rule. Kings might have built the monuments, and priests might have led the rituals, but it was the scribes who made sure their words endured. Without them, there would have been no history to remember. In the tablet houses of cities like Ur and Nippur, young scribes spent years training under strict masters. They copied hymns, contracts, and myths until they could carve cuneiform symbols purely from memory. These schools did not separate religion from administration. One moment, a student might be calculating the number of bricks needed for a wall. The next, he might be writing a prayer to the goddess Inanna. Over time, this blend of sacred and practical work created a mindset where writing itself became a holy act. Every mark of the stylus was both a record and an offering. Cuneiform was more than just a writing system. Each wedge-shaped sign could hold several meanings depending on the context. The symbol for star could also mean God, and the sign for life could just as easily mean account. This flexibility gave scribes enormous control over meaning. For example, they decided whether a king's name would include the dingir sign, the cuneiform symbol for divinity. Adding or leaving out this small wedge-shaped mark determined whether history remembered a ruler as simply powerful or as chosen by the gods. Because only a small number of people could read or write, about 1 to 2% of the population, scribes formed a powerful elite. They controlled all access to written knowledge, from temple hymns and myths to trade records and royal decrees. Both priests and kings depended on them to give authority to their words. Kramer realized that these scribes were not just record keepers. They were the real authors of civilization. Even as kingdoms fell and rulers vanished from memory, the same words, formulas, and sacred signs continued through the centuries. The scribes preserved order, faith, and history itself through their tablets, creating a quiet but lasting rule that outlived every throne. The pattern hidden in the clay. By the last decade of his life, Samuel Noah Kramer had read more Sumerian tablets than anyone else alive. Yet instead of feeling content, he grew uneasy. He couldn't shake the sense that something deeper lay beneath the words, that the true message of the Sumerians was not only in what they wrote, but in how they arranged it. The grammar was clear, the stories made sense, but the constant repetition of certain phrases, numbers, and symbols seemed too intentional to be a coincidence. As he studied further, Kramer began mapping these repeated elements like a scientist tracking constellations. Certain words always appeared together: pure, measure, binding, ascending. These weren't just stylistic choices, they appeared in temple hymns, royal decrees, and even student writing exercises. Over time, Kramer realized this repetition wasn't decoration, it was structure. It shaped how the Sumerians wrote, prayed, built, and even understood their world. Then came the numbers. Across hundreds of tablets, the same sacred counts appeared again and again: 3, 7, 12, and 60. These weren't random. 60 formed the base of their entire mathematical system, which we still use today in our 60-minute hours. 7 matched the number of visible planets known to them. 12 corresponded to the lunar months in a year. When a temple receipt recorded exactly 60 sheep, it wasn't a rough count, it was a deliberate act meant to align daily trade with the harmony of the cosmos. Kramer recognized this as a deliberate structural pattern, a shared framework that shaped how the Sumerians organized everything from temple rituals to tax records. It was as though an invisible design connected their spiritual life and their administrative work. What fascinated him most was how this structure endured over centuries. No matter the ruler or city, whether it was Ur-Nammu or Shulgi, Uruk or Lagash, the same rhythm remained. Every scribe, knowingly or not, followed the same unseen blueprint that blended belief, power, and order into a single system. To Kramer, it was as if the Sumerians had woven their worldview into the very fabric of writing itself. And the more he uncovered, the more he wondered. Who was truly shaping history? The kings who ruled, or the unseen pattern that ruled them all? Secrets of the Sumerian tablets. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists digging in the ancient city of Nineveh in modern-day Iraq made a discovery that changed the study of history. They unearthed thousands of clay tablets buried beneath the ruins of a royal palace. This collection, known as the Library of Ashurbanipal, dates to around 650 years before the Common Era. It preserved Assyrian copies of much older Sumerian texts, some of which had been written more than 1,500 years earlier. The tablets were covered in cuneiform writing and included myths, laws, astronomical observations, and hymns to the gods. Among the most intriguing stories were those about the Anunnaki, powerful deities who played central roles in Sumerian religion. These figures were often shown as tall, winged beings standing beside sacred symbols such as the 8-pointed star, which represented the goddess Inanna, and the crescent moon, which symbolized the moon god Sin. The winged figures, common in Mesopotamian art, represented divine power rather than literal flight. Sumerian texts like the Atrahasis myth described the Anunnaki not as visitors from the sky, but as divine forces who organized the world. They divided the heavens, the earth, and the underworld among themselves and gave tasks to lesser gods. When those lesser gods grew tired of their work, the higher deities decided to create humans to share the burden. The story explains that humanity was made by mixing divine essence with the clay of the earth. For Samuel Noah Kramer, this was not a tale of aliens or lost technology, but a poetic explanation of how early people understood the birth of civilization itself, how divine order shaped human life. What fascinated Kramer was how these stories echoed themes found in later traditions. Like the Book of Genesis, they describe life formed from the earth and touched by divine hands. But the Sumerian version offered more context about labor, justice, and responsibility between gods and humans. To Kramer, these myths revealed how the Sumerians viewed civilization as a sacred partnership between heaven and earth, a belief that still echoes through the world's oldest written records. Cult of personality. He wasn't just a king, he was a god in human form, or at least that's what his empire wanted everyone to believe. In the dust of ancient Girsu, once a thriving Sumerian city, archaeologists uncovered traces of that belief system, a world built on order, devotion, and power. In the autumn of 2024, a team led by Dr. Sebastian Ray from the British Museum unearthed more than 200 clay tablets and 60 ceilings in southern Iraq. These fragments, dating back to around 2,300 years before the Common Era, revealed the inner workings of the Akkadian Empire under its most ambitious ruler, Naram-Sin. The tablets recorded everything from barley rations to scribal lessons, showing how the empire was run with mathematical precision and absolute authority. Among the discoveries was a seal belonging to Lugal-Ushumgal, governor of nearby Lagash. When the fragments were pieced together, they revealed an inscription that read, "Naram-Sin, the mighty god of Akkad, king of the 4 quarters of the world. Lugal-Ushumgal, the scribe, governor, your servant." In just a few lines, it captured the hierarchy of an empire, one man above all, his subordinates bound by divine command. Among the finds are school tablets once used to train scribes, the bureaucrats who kept the empire running. These small clay lessons were the building blocks of state power, teaching young administrators how to record taxes, count resources, and enforce royal decrees. Together they formed what Ray calls a toolbox of empire. What fascinated scholars most was the evidence of a standardized metric system, the Akkad-gur, used to measure resources across vast territories. It proved that Naram-Sin's administration didn't rely only on faith or fear, but also on efficiency and structure. Yet the most revealing finds were the images of Naram-Sin himself. On several tablets he appeared wearing a horned crown, the mark of a god. This was propaganda in its earliest form, the merging of worship and politics into one seamless narrative. Before I die, please listen. In his final decade, Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the most respected scholars of Sumerian history, began to shift his focus. After years of carefully translating ancient clay tablets, he started exploring what those writings meant for how civilizations think and function. His later work wasn't just about decoding old words. It was about understanding how the Sumerians used language to shape their world and control it. Kramer discovered that for the Sumerians, writing wasn't only a tool for record-keeping, it was a tool for power. They believed words could turn belief into reality. When a scribe wrote that a king was chosen by the gods, that statement became accepted truth. No one questioned it because the written word carried divine authority. To write something down was to make it real. This idea fascinated Kramer. He realized that ancient Sumer wasn't ruled only by armies or priests. It was ruled by scribes. These scribes controlled the stories people believed about their rulers, their gods, and even themselves. They weren't just recording history, they were creating it. In a world where writing was sacred, whoever held the stylus held the power to define truth. In his later essays and lectures, Kramer argued that Sumerian society showed how writing could be used as a form of social control. Myths, laws, and rituals all reinforced the same cosmic order, the belief that everything, from kingship to daily labor, had divine approval. Once something was written into that order, it could not easily be challenged. For Kramer, this was the Sumerians' most profound legacy. They built the first known civilization not just through architecture or farming, but through the invention of recorded thought. Their tablets didn't just preserve history, they created it. Kramer's insight still resonates today. He showed that the power of writing, of shaping symbols and stories, has always guided how people see the world. The Sumerians may have lived 5,000 years ago, but their discovery endures. Whoever writes the story shapes the truth. Lost machine to save a civilization. It started with a drone flying over the quiet fields of southern Iraq. From above, researchers noticed a long 12-mile line stretching through the land. When they began digging, they thought it might be the remains of a strange-looking temple. But as more of it was uncovered, the truth was far more surprising. 4,000 years ago, the Sumerians had built what could only be called an anti-drought machine. The site was Girsu, an ancient Sumerian city near modern-day Nasiriyah. Thousands of years ago, this city was dedicated to the god Ningirsu, who ruled over both war and farming. The people who lived there depended on water from canals to grow food and survive. But when the canals began to dry up, the Sumerians faced a disaster. Without water, their fields turned to dust. Without crops, their people would starve. That's when they built something no one expected, a system that could move water over long distances. Archaeologists from the British Museum now believe this huge structure was a kind of flume designed to bring water to faraway lands and save their crops. According to architect and researcher Ebru Torun, nothing like it existed anywhere else in history. It was completely unique and far ahead of its time. What made it even more amazing was that this technology wasn't supposed to exist until thousands of years later. Modern historians believe that advanced water systems like this only appeared in the 1700s. But the Sumerians had done it in 2000 BC, trying to stop what could have been their own agricultural Armageddon. This discovery also echoed something the great scholar Samuel Noah Kramer once warned about. The Sumerians may have known more than we realize. He believed their stories and inventions carried messages for the future, hidden in clay tablets and ruins.